Hello, hello.
Professor Michel Bitbol and Venerable Geshela and the Mr. Arnold, Anne Sophie, and I hope the Venerable Elizabeth and all from Kalachakra Center.
Donc, je vais juste faire un petit message en français, puis après, je parlerai en anglais. Pour les personnes qui parlent français, vous avez une petite map monde en bas de l'écran sur le menu. Il faut que vous sélectionnez français dans le menu, comme ça, vous allez entendre la traduction. And so, hello to everyone. Just a quick technical announcement, and then we can start. You have to select the language in the menu, and you have a small icon with a planet, and that's where you will find the English channel, and you might need that in case some questions are translated in English. Hello everyone. We are very, very pleased to have this event starting. It's organized by Tibet House in Delhi and Kalachakra Center in Paris. I'm Arno, the spiritual program coordinator of Kalachakra Center. It's a French Tibetan Buddhist center. It's part of the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. It's a network of centers of Lama Geshe and Lama Rinpoche. And I'm delighted to introduce you the two speakers of this conference. Both are very well-known experts in their field, and also both are very passionate about the field of the expertise of the other speaker. So Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdul is an expert in Buddhist philosophy, but he's the director of Tibet House in Delhi. He's a regular translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a very respected teacher, scholar, and practitioner. And like His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very fond of science. And Michel Bitbol is a researcher for the CNRS, which is the French National Scientific Research Center, where any scientist would dream to work. He's a philosopher specialized in cognition and physics, and he's also very passionate about Buddhism, which he discovered during his research. Both of them have taken part to many conferences on Buddhism and science, including Mind and Life. Due to external circumstances, we had to adapt the schedule, and we are very sorry about that. So the afternoon session will stop at 3:30 p.m. instead of 4:30. So that's 7 p.m. in Indian time. And just to say a couple of words about the program of the day. So this morning will be dedicated to a presentation from both our speakers. They will explain the ultimate nature of reality from the perspective of quantum physics and from the perspective of the Buddhist view of emptiness. They will also discuss the paradoxes of quantum physics and how it relates to the two truths in Buddhism. The times will be 10 to noon Paris time, 3:30 p.m. to 5:30 Indian time. And then this afternoon we have 1 hour between 2:30 and 3:30 Paris time. That is to say 6 to 7 Indian time. And this will be a time for questions, discussions between our two panelists. What we suggest is that you email me the questions in advance. It can be during this morning or during the lunch break, and then I will share them with the speakers so that they have them in advance. We will write that down in the chat. So we are again very happy. Thank you so much to Venerable Geshela and Michel for accepting this conference. And I'm sure it's going to be a great time. And we are going to start with by hearing Michel Bitbol on quantum physics.
Thank you. Okay, so should I share my screen?
Sure, Michel, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be with you. I'm delighted also to interact again with Geshe Dorji Damdul, whom I met in a Mind and Life summer school session, in fact, somewhere in the US, almost, I think, 10 years ago. So it's a pleasure. And so I will speak of some connections I see between quantum mechanics and Madhyamaka Buddhism. But the first, sorry, I'm just, okay. So the first thing I have to do is to make a qualification, namely to moderate our enthusiasm for the comparison. I don't think we are comparing here two views of the world. We are not comparing two metaphysical pictures, because there is no Buddhist metaphysical picture of the world, no view of the world of Buddhism. There is a criticism of you. And quantum mechanics is also a form of criticism of you. Quantum mechanics cannot claim to give us a description of the ultimate nature of reality. This is very important to understand. Yet, quantum physics is not completely without relevance to this issue of the ultimate nature of reality, because it can give us a certain hint towards it, a certain intuition of what it can be, or rather of what it cannot be. So often the lessons of quantum physics about the ultimate nature of reality are negative rather than positive. This is also important. We cannot say that we are comparing two ways, one internal and one external, one experiential and one experimental, of probing into the essence of a reality which would be independent of us. Because precisely what both disciplines have discovered in a mode which is not connected, but which is very similar, what both disciplines have discovered is that it is impossible to speak of a reality which is completely independent of us. So, in fact, what we are comparing when we are comparing quantum physics and Buddhism are two of the most radical critiques of metaphysical views and essentialism that have been proposed in the history of human thought. So, for Buddhism, it's quite obvious because, you know, suspension of views is almost there right from the start of Buddhism. For instance, there is a famous Buddha's parable of the arrow. You all know that, but I will remind it to you. If you were shot by a poisoned arrow, says the Buddha, and the doctor was summoned to extract it, what would you do? Would you ask such questions as, who shot the arrows? From which tribe did he come? Who made the arrow? Who made the poison? And so on. Or would you just have the doctor immediately pull out the arrow? So in fact, the Buddha says that the purpose of Buddhism is practical rather than theoretical. It's not to know all the causes, the supposed big causes of events, but just cope with events. Now, of course, you could say, maybe it's just modesty, just that Buddhism is not concerned by the ultimate, not concerned at least with a discourse about the ultimate nature of things, but in fact there is some ultimate nature of things which is completely independent of us and independent of what we do to understand it. But I don't think it's correct either. I think really the suspension of any attempt to cope, not to cope, to disclose the ultimate nature of reality in discourse and in symbols is not just because it's modesty. It's really because it's self-contradictory. And the branch of Buddhism called Prasangika Madhyamaka was very much concerned by the necessity to show that disclosing an absolute nature of reality is a contradiction. And it generates a lot of contradictions as exposed by the famous tetralemmas of Nagarjuna, even stronger than the famous dilemmas. And the conclusion of that, or maybe the lesson of all that, is that ultimate truth, if any, cannot be captured by a metaphysical picture expressed in words or symbols. It's a matter of being, of practice, not of description on paper, I would say. The same for quantum physics. Quantum physics is not one more view of the world. It was born as a suspension of metaphysical views. Even from the beginning, Bohr, Heisenberg, in this famous conference in Brussels in 1927, said that we cannot give a unified picture of the atomic and subatomic domain. It's impossible to derive such a unified picture from the quantum formalism. Quantum mechanics, said Bohr, is only a mathematical symbolism intended to predict probabilistically the outcome of experiments and nothing beyond experiments. It's very important to understand that under this very minimalist interpretation, no paradoxes, none of the paradoxes of which I will speak later are left. There is no way to formulate paradoxes when quantum symbols are not supposed to be description of objects or descriptions of their properties. There have been recent developments going in this same direction of suspension of any metaphysical view. Quantum mechanics now is more and more seen as a theory of the limits of available experimental information. This is especially clear from the amazing development of quantum computing and of the theory of quantum computers. It is also more and more seen as what Christopher Fuchs called a user's manual, just a guide for prediction and nothing more. No description of a world out there, no description of a reality as it is supposed to be independent of us, because maybe there is none of this reality independent of us. And when you see the list of experiments that have been done recently, for instance, there have been new tests of the so-called Bell inequalities by Nobel Prize Anton Zeilinger in Vienna, Austria. By the way, Anton Zeilinger is one of the most important physicists who partook in the Mind and Life meetings in the past. And his experiments put more and more pressure on the assumption of realism, namely the assumption that quantum symbols give us a description of a reality which is supposed to be independent of us. It put much more pressure on the assumption of realism than on the assumption of locality. You know, because you have read many things about quantum mechanics, that usually once people say that quantum mechanics is non-local, that quantum mechanics describes a world that is completely a totality which is impossible to separate into pieces, and that all its parts interact with each other in a way that it cannot be disentangled. But in fact, what these experiments shows is not so much that this picture of the world is correct, that this view of the world is correct, as to the fact that there is no view of the world whatsoever which can be produced by quantum mechanics. Okay, if you accept that, namely that there is no view of the world that can be derived from quantum mechanics, a lot of clarification arises. We can understand quantum physics very easily if we dispel absolutist views of the world. Quantum physics, in fact, invites us to dispel the Platonician dream or illusion of Western science as a whole, namely the dream of disclosing the intrinsic nature of things by identifying them to mathematical symbols and structures. This has been the dream of science since 2,500 years of Western science. Quantum physics, in fact, can be clarified by a philosophy which doesn't belong to the Western Platonician cultural inheritance. Which one? I think precisely Madhyamaka Prasankika. The so-called paradoxes of quantum physics are solved straight away as soon as one accepts that the microentities of quantum physics are empty of intrinsic being and empty of intrinsic determinations. Let me give an example. The famous paradox of the combination of a wave nature and a particle nature. In fact, this is virtually, it is absolutely impossible that an entity can be both a wave and a particle. A wave is extended in the whole of space, and a particle is localized. How can it be? People have just accepted that, saying that this is one of the strangenesses or paradoxes of quantum mechanics. But since 1927, Niels Bohr had given a very good dissolution of this paradox, because he said it's just a matter of abandoning, of renouncing the idea that these, namely wave and particles, are intrinsic absolute natures of things. They are just aspects of an exploration we make, and these aspects are relative to the gestures, to the types of experimental apparatus we use. According to Niels Bohr, there are no waves and no particles. There are only wave-like phenomena and particle-like phenomena. And these wave-like phenomena and particle-like phenomena are just complementary phenomena that are both relative to different kinds of experimental contexts. So it's much easier to combine wave-like phenomena with particle-like phenomena, saying that each one is relative to a different type of apparatus than just combining a nature of wave and a nature of particle. There is no intrinsic nature of things, just relations. Relativity of properties was one of the first discoveries of quantum mechanics. Since 1925, Heisenberg understood that quantum theory should not be considered as a description of relations between absolute intrinsic quantities or absolute intrinsic properties. He said, we should establish a theoretical quantum mechanics analogous to classical mechanics, but in which only relations between observable quantities occur. But what is an observable quantity? An observable quantity is a quantity that is in relation to us, that takes on its values, but only relatively to what we do. So there is relations everywhere and absolute properties nowhere. So much so, and I have to do a little drop of mathematics, if you accept, so much so that the basic principle of quantum mechanics is this relation, which is written on my right, namely the famous non-commutation relation, namely that the order, for instance, here you have PQ, which is not equal to QP. That means that the order in which you measure the velocity and the position makes a difference. If you first measure the velocity and then the position, things are not the same as if you measure first the position and then the velocity. And what is the importance of this very simple mathematical statement is that it tells you that you cannot abstract your variables or your quantities or your properties from what you do to access them. They cannot be completely separated from that. Okay, so there is no absolute value, no absolute property, no intrinsic property or value. And this is exactly what Niels Bohr said in 1929. We have to acknowledge, he said, a limitation with regard to the possibility of distinguishing between phenomena and their observation. Okay, we cannot really distinguish between them. And so we cannot abstract phenomena from the relation to their observation. And then he concluded, an independent reality in the ordinary physical sense can neither be ascribed to the phenomena nor to the agencies of observation. No independent reality, no absolute reality, no non-relational reality. Okay, now relativity goes everywhere. Even not only relativity of properties, but also relativity of entities. I show you a wonderful sentence by Philippe Goyaille, a very young researcher, who explained in a recent paper that identical particles of quantum mechanics are neither persistent nor non-persistent, nor both nor neither. This is amazingly similar to the tetralemma of Nagarjuna, even though Goyaille didn't know it, and even though he didn't quote Nagarjuna. These terms, namely persistence or non-persistence, are just descriptors of different models of the same experimental data. So there is no thing like an absolute persistence of intrinsically existing particles, nothing like that. In fact, you use different models, the model of persistence and the model of non-persistence, to cope with the same kind of relative phenomena. Okay. Then I go directly to the mention that in quantum field theory, even the number of particles is a relational observable. There is no way to say, in this box there are 10 particles, or in this box there are no particles, because even the notion that there is no particle in a box is relative to the mode of access to this box. You can have cases in which, even though with certain modes of access you find no particle in a box, when you use a different mode of access, for instance, an accelerated detector, then you find plenty of particles. So the fact, the existence or non-existence of particles in the box is also relational. And that's the reason why Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger, the famous author of the Schrödinger equation and the Schrödinger's cat paradox, said the particles in the naive sense of the old days do not exist. But do not exist might be found as a little bit nihilist in the usual acception of Buddhism. And we have to qualify this non-existence. In fact, we cannot say that particles do not exist, but they both exist and do not exist, and neither, in fact, neither exist nor do not exist. We can also say that the particles have the modes of existence of a rainbow. For instance, it was said by Bernard d'Espagna. What does Bernard d'Espagna mean when he says particles have the mode of existence of a rainbow? He means, okay, a rainbow is an appearance that can only arise in relation to three factors. It needs these three causes and conditions. The one cause and condition is the sun. Another cause and condition is the droplets of water, for instance, when it rains. And the third condition is the eye of an observer to look at these drops that refract the light of the sun. And when there are these three factors, then the appearance of a rainbow arises. The same for particles. Only if there are all these conditions, namely a box, maybe empty or maybe non-empty, and then, you know, an observer with a certain type of apparatus, accelerated or non-accelerated, then something arises, which is the appearance of what we call particles, because we are, you know, we are terribly conditioned by our habits of thought of ordinary life and also classical physics. Another important feature of relativity in quantum mechanics, you know, look at this, the title of this paper recently published by Czeslaw Bruckner on my right. The title of the paper that is that facts are relative. It, you know, this is mind-boggling because usually one thinks that facts are absolute. They are what happens. They are what have occurred. We cannot say that facts depend on the one who decides that there is a fact or there is not a fact. And yet, accepting that facts are relative is the only way to dissolve one of the main paradoxes of quantum mechanics, which is called Wigner's friend paradox. So let me explain you a little bit this paradox, not very much, but just a simplified version of it. Imagine that in this box, very, you know, with this black rectangle, you have an observer, and this observer has made a quantum experiment, and then he observes, or she observes, that there is a light bulb lit on his or her right, as in the picture here. There is a light bulb which is lit on the right. But the lab is completely closed. And when an external observer, an observer who is external to the lab, tries to describe what occurs in the lab, the only way he can or she can do that according to the formalism of quantum mechanics is to ascribe a superposed state vector to what there is in the lab. Not only the quantum particle, but also the measuring apparatus and also the experimenter in the lab. And so there is a superposition between one state in which the apparatus shows the left bulb lit, and one state in which the apparatus shows the right bulb lit. And also the, you know, not only the apparatus is superposed, but even the experimenter in the lab is superposed. There is one version of the experimenter who says, oh, I've seen a light bulb lit on the left, and another one in which the experimenter says, now I see a light bulb lit on the right. So all superposition. And this looks very mysterious. And this looks all the more mysterious than when you, by your mind's eye, you look into the lab, you see that the state of the lab is well determined. It's not superposed. So who is right? The internal experimenter or the external observer? And the answer of all these interpreters of quantum mechanics is that both are right. Relative to one, there is a well-defined state, and relative to the other, there is a superposition. And there is no way to say that there is one of them who is absolutely right. Being right or wrong is relative. So all these interpretations, quantum Bayesianism, of which I will speak later, relational quantum mechanics by Rovelli, Bruckner, Zeilinger, information theoretic interpretations, all bite the hardest bullet by accepting that facts cannot be abstracted from the conditions and situation of their observation. Okay? Relativity of facts. So you see, relativity of properties, relativity of entities, and relativity of facts. No absolute facts, no absolute entities, no absolute properties. Okay, in the West, there is a philosophical background of this issue, but it's usually a little bit marginalized in our culture. For instance, the whole so-called skeptical school have very much insisted on the relativity of properties. For instance, Sextus Empiricus, who is a late inheritor of the skeptical line of thought in the West, said that, in fact, everything is relative, and everything is relative in two senses. First, things can be relative to the subject who is judging. And secondly, they can be relative to each other, namely relative to the thing observed. As, for instance, right is relative to left. So there are two modes of relativity. One is relativity to the cognizer, or the observing or knowing subject. And the other one is mutual relativity of known objects. And the conclusion of Sextus Empiricus was that since everything is relative, we must suspend judgment as to what things are independently and in their own nature. So the problem here is that Sextus Empiricus supposed that we have to suspend judgment about what things are in the absolute, but for him, it was not absurd to think that even though we cannot know them, there are things in the absolute. But before him, there was another skeptical thinker who was, I would say, his teacher, the teacher of Sextus Empiricus. And this other skeptical thinker was Pyrrho. Pyrrho was a Greek skeptic of the 3rd century before the Christian era. And according to him, there is not even a meaning to ascribe to the idea that there might be something existing in the absolute, but that unfortunately we cannot know that. And interestingly, not Sextus Empiricus, but Pyrrho was the guy who went with Alexander the Great to India and who brought back the teachings he learned from, Indian thinkers such as Buddhist thinkers and also Brahmanic thinkers. So presumably Pyrrho was influenced by Buddhism. Okay, Immanuel Kant much more recently said something very similar. It is amazing to hear that an object consists only of relations with other objects. But this is because such object is nothing other than a relation between something in general and the faculty of knowing. So he said, it is normal that science cannot know anything else than mutual relations between properties of objects. And the reason is that these properties are not something that is to be known in the absolute, but it's just a relation with us who are trying to know them. Well, relativities are everywhere in Buddhism, and but there is a little problem that I want to raise here. You can say that shunyata so that we translate usually by emptiness, is the equivalent of pratitya mutpada that we translate by dependent arising. And for instance, in a text called Vigraha Vyavartani, Nagarjuna said, the being dependent of beings is called emptiness. Okay, the being dependent of beings, namely pratitya samutpada, is called emptiness, namely shunyata. Okay, so you have the feeling that emptiness is just a way to name dependent arising, which is correct in some way. But shunyata, emptiness, is also a critical concept, namely not a way to assert dependent arising, but rather to criticize own being. It is a powerful rebuttal of the views of the world rather than a view of the world in its own right. Now, if you look in the Buddhist literature, especially the Madhyamaka, you find that there are two types of relativities. The relativity between the two entities which are, or properties which are known, between known and known, between known properties and known property, but there is also the relativity between the knower and the known. For instance, about the relation between what is known and another thing which is known. In Ratnavali, Nagarjuna said, if this exists, that exists, in the same way as when there is the short, there is the long. So here there is an example which is almost similar to Sextus Empiricus. He said that it is similar to the right to the left, the relation of the right to the left. Something is to the right only relative to what is to the left, and something is to the left only relative to what is to the right. And here it's the same. Something is short only relative to something which is long. Something which is long is only relative to something which is short. Okay? The same for Chandrakirti. Things are only produced in the sense that they are coordinated as causes and conditions with regard to each other. But there is also the relation between all these properties and things and appearances and the one to which they appear, namely the knower. For instance, here in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, someone is made known by something. Something is made known by someone. How could there be someone without something and something without someone? So you have here the dependent arising of the knower and the known. In another text by Nagarjuna, you find the same. Knowledge and the object to be known do not exist by own being. They are co-arising. They are dependently arising. They are relative to each other. And Chandrakirti said the same. When valid cognizers exist, then there are objects which are objects of comprehension. And when objects which are objects of comprehension exist, then there are valid cognizers. There is, co-emergence of cognizers and what is cognized. Okay, so we have these feelings that, in certain way, the Madhyamaka thinkers have posited a world of universal interdependence. And then you think, maybe the world is made of a real network of relations. And this would be a view of Buddhism, especially Madhyamaka Buddhism. But maybe also it's not the case. Maybe the relational view of the world is finally self-dissolving, because if even the network of relation is relative to something, then there is no absolute relational network. And this is exactly what will be confronted to in the view of Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli is an exceptional physicist who is specialist of quantum field theory and especially of gravitational quantum field theory. And he recently published a book called entitled Helgoland. this is an exceptional, remarkable description of the quantum revolution, the quantum view, not view of the world precisely, but the quantum renewal of all our thought. I strongly recommend this book. To me, it is the best book of popular science that has been ever written about quantum mechanics. So in this book, Carlo Rovelli insists on a relational conception of quantum mechanics called precisely relational quantum mechanics. He said, objects are only such in a context, that is, in relation to other objects. They are nodes to which bridges are attached. The world is a set of perspectives like mirrors that only exist in the reflection of all other mirrors. So it's a wonderful way to describe the picture of a network of relation. And he insists that there is no reality in quantum mechanics without relationships between physical systems. It's not things that can enter into relations, but relations that can give rise to the notion of things. So in fact, the ultimate reality is relations. And what is very interesting in this book by Carlo Rovelli is that there is a whole chapter about Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka Buddhism. So I think it's really an explicit relation that Carlo Rovelli makes between his view of quantum mechanics and the ideas of Nagarjuna. According to Rovelli, the central thesis of Nagarjuna's book is simply that nothing has an existence in itself independent of anything else. The resonance with quantum mechanics is immediate. So it's very clear. There is a connection between both. But which kind of connection? The connection that nothing has an existence in itself independent of anything else. And Rovelli adds, Nagarjuna offers us a formidable conceptual tool for understanding quantum relationality. It is possible to think of interdependence without autonomous essences, which would then enter into relation. So, for the first time in his philosophical inquiries, Rovelli found finally a philosopher, and here a Buddhist, an Indian Buddhist philosopher, who understood what he was desperately trying to convey, namely that there is no point positing absolute natures, but only relations. So I agree with Rovelli to a certain extent, yet I think he's not radical enough. Why? Because in fact, by positing the idea of a relational world, he's still holding a view of the world, and he should go much further. If he doesn't go further, he has a problem. In fact, he falls into what is known as the trilemma of knowledge, namely either positing an absolute foundation, or falling into a circle, or accepting an infinite regress. And the three possibilities are deleterious for our understanding of the world. In fact, Rovelli posits an implicit foundation. He takes what is called God's standpoint, namely he's trying to extract himself from the world, to see it from outside and say, oh, the world is not made of absolute essences, but it's made of a network of relations. For instance, here in this paper, I read, the physical structure of the world is identified as this net of relationships. So according to him, the world is, in the absolute, a net of relations. And Rovelli confirms that in another text, reality, he says, is relation. And other young philosophers have found exactly the same interpretation of Revel's saying, namely that relational quantum mechanics affirms that reality is inherently relational. One could say is absolutely relational. And this is a problem because in fact, you accept that there is a view of the world, that there is a foundation, and that this final foundation is an absolute relationism. But many other thinkers, such as Jacques Pienard here, have criticized this because they find that this is contradictory, self-contradictory. He said, are we supposed to understand this net of relations as being an absolute network? Of course we cannot, if relational quantum mechanics is to be consistent. No interpretation that endorses fact relativity can endorse the absoluteness of relation. It is self-contradictory and self-defeating. You can also say that relational quantum mechanics falls into a circle because, for instance, relational quantum mechanics defines or says that systems can only exist relative to each other. And then it defines quantum systems by a node of relations. So he really posits a relation between systems and then posits that systems are nothing else than relations. So there is a problem because it's, this mutual definition of systems and relations is circular. You can also say that, you may fall into an infinite regress with this story of the definition of systems by their mutual relations, because relative to what the mutual relation is defined. According to Rovelli, mutual relation between two systems is defined by relation to a third system. But then relation between these two systems and the third system, relative to what are they defined? Relative to a fourth system, and so on and so forth. A fifth system, a sixth system, a seventh system, no end, infinite regress. So there is a problem. Relationism should not be an absolutism. And Rovelli, I think, understood that a little bit. In his book, you find that according to Nagarjuna, interdependence, namely relationality, can be thought of in the absence of autonomous senses, which would then enter into relation. That's fine. But he adds, Rovelli adds also, that Nagarjuna declared that relations also are relative. They are not absolute. And therefore, that emptiness of own being is itself empty of own being. And this is, of course, confirmed by Nagarjuna himself, who says in his Mula Madhyamaka Karika, if there were to be something non-empty, there wouldn't be something called empty. However, there is nothing that is not empty. How can there be something empty? Namely, empty is relative to the non-empty. Empty is not an absolute notion, okay? And therefore, by disabsolutizing emptiness, Nagarjuna comes to the following conclusion. For whomever emptiness is the view, that one has accomplished nothing. And other authors have said the same in an even more picturesque way. To cling to a concrete reality, says Sarah, is to be as foolish as cattle. But clinging to emptiness is even worse. So saying that emptiness is a view, saying even that pratitya samutpada is a view of what the world is in the absolute is wrong. Okay, so I will end soon, but let me say that by contrast with this relational quantum mechanics of Carlo Rovelli, whom I take as, or which I take rather, which I take as a sort of absolute relationism, I can compare that to another approach of quantum mechanics, which is called quantum Bayesianism, and which is a relative relativism, I would say, and therefore a more radical dissolution of all absolutist views of the world. Let me compare the two views, not the two views, sorry, the two approaches carefully, because one is a view, it is relational quantum mechanics, which is a view of the world as relational. And the other one is not a view, it's just a dissolution of views. So for the two conceptions or the two approaches of quantum mechanics, there are no absolute facts. So both agree. For both, facts are relations with something else. For instance, for Rovelli, facts are relations with another system or another object. And according to quantum Bayesianism, facts are relational events or even a relational experience relative to an agent, a human agent who intervenes in the process. But when you come to more elaborate, approach of what is quantum mechanics according to one and according to the other, then you find differences. For instance, according to relational quantum mechanics is a complete description of the world qua relational network. But according to quantum Bayesianism, quantum mechanics is by no way a description of anything, not even of a system of relations. According to quantum Bayesianism, quantum mechanics is a complete user's manual for any inhabitant of the world, qua experience. It is just a decision theory. It is a tool that we use to cope with the world. It's a little bit like what I said, about the parable of the arrow of the Buddha before. There is no description of what the world is in itself, no disclosure of the causes of events, but just a way to cope with the world we are in. The laws of quantum mechanics, according to relational quantum mechanics, are parts of this description of the world, part of this relational description of the world. But according to quantum Bayesianism, the laws of quantum mechanics are norms of beliefs and action. They are just ways to guide us in exploring rather than ways of describing what we explore. And so finally, I can say in one case, you have a view of the world qua absolute meshwork of relations, and in the other case, you have a method to cope with and take advantage of this world, of which we know nothing in the absolute. And this way of coping with the world is also relative to our situation. So on the one hand, you have, once again, an absolute relationism, and on the other hand, you have a relative relationism, which I find is more consistent. Okay, so maybe, I could go further and so on, but I think I should stop at this point and leave some space for Geshela to make his talk and for us to have a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your attention, and I very much expect a nice discussion with Geshela.
Thank you very much, Michel. So Geshela, I think it's your turn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Michel Bitbol. And thank you, Kalachakra Center. So basically this, the dialogue, how it happened was that the last year when I was in Kalachakra Center, the Kalachakra Center Simple, when I was there, Venerable Genzala, he is, I would say, he's very dynamic. And he said that, what do you think about meeting with one professor here? And in the retreat, there's one professor there. I said, who is the professor? And finally, he made the arrangement. And then I met Professor Williams. And I was so impressed by him. And Venerable Genzala, coordinated between two of us, and they asked if there's a possibility to have some dialogues between Professor Michel Bitbol and myself, and Professor Williams readily accepted, who was, I think, then the director of the American University in Paris. And he readily accepted. And so everything happened. They snowballed from there. I would say they're initiated by Venerable Genzala. And thank you so much. This is in fact, incredibly great, the meeting point. And that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had, as Professor Michel Bitbol already indicated, that many of these conferences were already organized in the Mindful, as what is referred to as the Mindful Life, then Mindful Life Conference, and gradually evolved as a Mindful Life Institute. And the Mindful Life, so now under the Institute, Mindful Life Conference happens sometimes. And I met Professor Michel Bitbol and the summer research of the Mindful Life program in what is that? New York, upstate, I think. Yeah. So this is basically the basic, the background of this dialogue. And Tibet House here, Tibet House New Delhi, we also organize many of these conferences, almost like every year we have a conference on the quantum mechanics and Buddhist philosophy of emptiness, almost every year. And Professor, I'm sure that Professor Michel Bitbol knows Professor C.C. Roy, who is, again, a very dynamic physicist here in India, very senior physicist in India. And he used to be the main convener of this conference. He would recruit all the scientists. And at one point, he also brought Professor, what's his name? Nicholas Gissen from Switzerland. And then he, I think, came twice. We invited him to give a talk here in Tibet House. So this is a very quick, the information about the background of the meeting. And I hope that His Holiness initiated a dialogue on quantum mechanics and Buddhist philosophy since many years ago. The first of its kind, more officially done, was in the Jawaharlal Nehru University here in Delhi, a very renowned university in Delhi. That was the program where the meeting happened. And and alongside, parallel to that, Tibet House, we have been organizing more on the national level, from various the institutions. Okay. Okay, so to jump into the main talk of myself, in fact, that'd be wonderful to have the interactions with the audience, and then I guess, I personally have some questions on physics, quantum mechanics, and the audience, of course, would have lots of questions on quantum mechanics as well as Buddhist philosophy. And I really appreciate Professor Michel Bitbol's point of view of the Buddhist philosophy. In fact, I know about his background, his interest in Buddhist philosophy since many years ago. This was what I came to know about. And so now the point is that I'm going to give just like an overview of the Buddhist philosophy, and then once in a while I may correlate this with quantum mechanics. And in the first place, you will see the difference between the modern physics and Buddhist philosophy. There may be various differences, but at the same time, you will see one difference there, which I may highlight it more clearly here. So I'm talking about the effects of insight into emptiness. Effects, the benefit or the immediate effects and the long-term effects. Two, the whole purpose for the Buddhist Shakyamuni, when he first taught the emptiness, the concept of ultimate reality on the planet Earth, there's a soteriological purpose there. A soteriological purpose, which means that there's a greater goal. The meaning, because we are all seeking. Finally, the physicists, they're going to do physics exploration. Neuroscientists, they go into the neuroscience. Then the aesthetics, music, dance, the games, football, then the business, and so forth. And the mathematicians, they go to these things, but there's some aspiration there. There's the goal there. There's some goal that they aspire to attain. So what is that goal? There may be hundreds and thousands of millions of goals. If there are like, say, 8 billion human beings, 8 billion goals are there. And all these goals, we come to realize that if you boil them down, we see that this can all be boiled down to two. One is to stay away from miseries and to embrace happiness. These are two goals, which are being shared by everyone, all the human beings on this planet Earth, as well as the animals. So with this in mind, by the way, I'm just wondering if you can see my screen. Do you see my screen? Good. Okay. So in terms of effect, the short-term effect and the long-term effect of the shunyata, emptiness concept. So here it says, profound, peaceful, elaboration-free, clear-light, non-composite. Such a natural reality. Such a natural reality is what I found. Finding no one who can fathom this path in silence, I'll return to the words. So there's a description that is so profound that the people cannot really understand it. And so because of this, the Buddha declined to teach for the first 49 days after becoming enlightened. And then in other words, this concept is so profound that people cannot really fathom it. And Niels Bohr, what is that if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. So with experience of emptiness, it said that you will have a tinge of a fear. So this is a similar immediate effect of the understanding of quantum mechanics versus understanding of shunyata. And then the next question is, why in Buddhism? One Buddhist teachings, there's a tremendous emphasis on the need to understand the objective reality. In other words, what is objectivity? Why objectivity is emphasized in Buddhist philosophy? Say, on the one hand, we talk about the Professor Bitbol, explain how everything is subjective, relational, and the relative relation, the relation, and so forth. So there's a concept of no absolute, no objective reality. So for many of us who may be not too exposed to the concept of the emptiness or quantum mechanics, I may as well take you to, say, a very simple example of a dream. Say, in the dream, you see dream contents, the dream ghost, or the dream people in the dream apples, dream flowers as real. The moment you wake up, you see that, oh, these are not real. These were all coming from my mind. This all came from my mind. So your mind was the subject, and the contents, they were the object. So the objects, they did not the dream objects, they do not exist from the object, they exist from the subject. In the dream, you see them as existing from the object, objective reality. When you wake up, you see the reality, you see that they don't exist from the object, they all exist from the subject. So in Buddhism, they find particularly Nagarjuna, which of course the Buddha himself taught and further explained by the Nagarjuna, was that there's nothing really existing objectively. It simply means everything is like a dream, including dream also as like a dream. So there's going to be little, I say, the complicated. Of course, I would be very happy to entertain your questions, but at the same time, I won't go to that extent as of now. Say everything is like a dream. Let's stay there. Now, say, why objectivity? So if the question is that in the dream, you see everything is so real. Real meaning 100% from the object. You wake up, you see that there was nothing from the object, but all the dream contents, they came from your mind. So then the question is, what is really there from the object? What is really there? So this is the question here. Why objectivity is emphasized in Buddhist philosophy? Why objectivity? Objective, what is there? And then, in other words, so this is quite a tricky question, particularly those people who are already exposed to Buddhist philosophy. You'll be very interested to know that the same question can take you into two different thoughts. There's the ambiguity there. One is that why objectivity is emphasized in Buddhist philosophy. Say they don't project your thoughts. So just tell us what is really there. This is one question. Number two is that without imposing your thoughts, what's really there? And the question is what is really there? The objectivity. Objectivity does really exist. Does it really exist? The objectivity, does it really exist? These are two questions. So for this, as I said earlier, that even the exploring what the objectivity, whether or not objectivity exists, to explore the objectivity exists or not exists on the objective level, and what is the purpose? What's the purpose? So it takes us to the deeper purpose. We said that finally we all want, whether you know Buddhist philosophy or not, whether or not you know quantum mechanics, finally your job is to expect some fulfillment, and fulfillment, joy, happiness, freedom, to the highest level. So to say that to get that highest level of the freedom, highest level of happiness, highest level of the ease, fulfillment, that highest level, do you have that potential within you? Because it's not just analyzing whether the flower is red or white, because I want happiness, I don't want suffering. Do we have the potential to experience infinite happiness? So for this, like squeezing a handful of sand and squeezing a handful of sunflower seeds, there's a difference there. Squeezing a handful of sunflower seeds, oil does come out. Squeezing a handful of sand, no oil comes out. So if we are like the handful of sand, no point we put effort to get maximum happiness and to get rid of suffering, because this is not achievable. Whereas if we are a handful of sunflower seeds, just as the squeezing handful of sunflower seeds, oil does come out. We also, if we have the Buddha, the seed of perfection within us, the seed of infinite happiness, seed of total fearlessness, seed of liberation within us, then we can. All our efforts are worthy to exert. So Nagarjuna, he taught that yes, what the Buddha taught, that everyone has a seed of perfection. Everyone has a seed of liberation. Everyone has a seed of infinite happiness. What is that known as? That is known as Dharma Dhatu. That is known as the Buddha nature. And it's not that if you're a Buddhist, you have the Buddha nature. No, whether you're Buddhist or not, it doesn't matter. Everybody has the seed of Buddha nature. So when you say Buddha nature, Buddha, it doesn't mean Buddhism. It is a Sanskrit word. It simply means full awakening. Everybody has, whether you're Buddhist or not, whether male or female, it doesn't matter. Everyone has a seed of awakening to the total liberation and infinite happiness. So these are the two verses are by Nagarjuna as a commentary on the Buddha Shakyamuni's the confidence of sharing with us that we all have this seed of perfection within us. I bow to the Dharma Dhatu, the seed of perfection within us, which resides in every sentient being across the board of humanity, the board of sentient beings. When not aware of it, if you're not aware of this treasure, they circle through the two realms. They are in samsara, they're suffering, sickness, aging, death, tension, and so forth. And dissatisfaction, bullies, domestic violence, and what on the international level, the border tensions, all these things happen because of our failing to discover our potential inside. Due to just that being purified, if you come to discover that, remove the dirt and the gold inside us, if we unfold it fully, just due to just that being purified, what is such samsara's cause? So when not purified, then it serves as being in samsara. This very purity is then nirvana. Nirvana meaning liberation from all all fears of life. Likewise, enlightenment is just this. Okay, then how to get there? How to get there? If this is a potential that I have, yes, all what I do is ultimately for that purpose. Some people say that, no, I'm not looking for happiness. I just want adventure. But why do you want adventure? With adventure, I feel happy. Again, you are looking for happiness. Or some people may not like the word happiness. Happiness seems very sensual, physical pleasure. No, happiness doesn't mean that. But if you're not happy with this word happy, go for another word, fulfillment or ease and so forth. The point is that all these miseries, dissatisfactions, they are because of the wrong thinking, ignorance. So this ignorance, as long as this ignorance is not fixed, no matter what you do, your problems will keep arising. Your problems keep arising. And all the infinite things that you encounter with any phenomena, there's a problem. The problem there. So how to stop all these problems is, instead of thinking to fix the external factors, fix the internal factor, which is ignorance. So it says that, where would I possibly find enough leather with which to cover the entire earth? No, just cover your 2 tiny feet. That suffices covering the entire earth. Yet wearing leather just to cover the soles of my 2 tiny feet is equivalent to covering the entire earth with it. In other words, this verse is from Bodhisattva Shantideva, and of course it is what the Buddha taught, that fix your problem. Ignorance is the root of all the problems. Fix the problem, all the problems are solved. So now, how to get there? How to cover the 2 tiny feet with the leather? How to remove the ignorance? So ignorance, by the very definition, is the misknowledge, not knowing the reality, distorting the reality. It is like darkness. In doubt, you don't see the reality. So to remove the darkness, what should you do? You should introduce the counter force, which is light. Likewise, to remove the darkness of ignorance, it is only through introducing the light of the wisdom. The next question is, what is that wisdom? This is the next question. Okay, so wisdom means a mind whose apprehension to object tallies with the reality. You should know the reality. How to get the reality? Reality we cannot superimpose. You cannot conjecture, because the moment you subjectively conjecture something, you are mixing your thoughts. You are forcing your thoughts on the reality. You are blurring the reality. You will never see the reality. So the approach of seeing the reality is that you must maintain a very open mind. So this is what the Buddha taught, that just as the goldsmith tests the purity of the gold by cutting, rubbing, and burning the gold, you should also examine my words and put them into practice, not simply because you respect me. In fact, just for information, that there was like, I think about like 16 years ago when I was in Cambridge for my English improvement lessons in Cambridge. I used to meet a lot of physicists, and particularly I met one physicist who was extremely brilliant, so brilliant, and yet very difficult to talk to, extremely difficult to talk to. And then not that he's arrogant, he simply doesn't want to hear anything nonsensical things. There's such an element of the forthrightness. And the moment you say something, and if it is not sensible, he will say there's eternal contradiction there. So we started to know each other through a common friend, and we started to have discussions. And we had long discussions, debates till 12 midnight. And then suddenly he made the statement, in this world, only physics is education. And I said, why? He said, because only physics allows you to have critical thinking. All others are imitation of the earlier teachers. Then I said, okay, listen what the Buddha has to say. I quoted this verse, just as bhikshus and wise people, just as goldsmith tests the purity of gold by cutting, rubbing, and burning gold, you should also examine my words and put them to practice, not simply because you respect me. And the physicist, he remained silent for a few seconds, and he said, oh, the Buddha must have been a great physicist. Okay, so this is approach, this where all biases must be stopped, and all your superimpositions of your thoughts must be stopped. You maintain an open mind to see what is really there, rather than, projecting your own thoughts. Okay, so what is that reality? It says the ontological reality. And I would make a distinction between ontological reality and the ultimate reality. In fact, it was, I think about like 2 years or 3 years ago, we had one of these conferences, quantum mechanics and the emptiness according to Nagarjuna. And one of very senior, the physicists from Bangalore, from India, highly respected physicist, and he was the chairperson for my talk, where I was one of the panelists. And then I talked about the ultimate reality. Then he, in his talk, he said that, okay, how do you know that the emptiness that Nagarjuna posited is the ultimate reality? This is a very beautiful question. This amazingly profound question. And in fact, I would say that those people who are already aware of the two truths, ultimate truth and conventional truth, is very important for us to keep this in mind, that what makes us think that emptiness of objective existence, emptiness of true existence, emptiness of absolute existence is the ultimate truth. Ultimate. Why do you call this as ultimate? This is a very serious question. And I was so happy that, of course, he was so senior. He must be, when he attended the program, he must be in his 90s. Yet his mind was extremely sharp and clear. Okay, so what's the ontological reality? Ontological reality is, okay, say what is there on the object, whether the emptiness object or the objective reality or the emptiness object, whatever is the reality out there, that is ontological reality. And what your mind superimposes is more epistemological reality. So in Buddhist philosophy, there is what is known as the emptiness of objective existence. This is the ontological reality or the ultimate reality. And this, to get there, as Professor Bitbol very clearly indicated, that is not that, nothing's really there. This takes one into, say, the total nihilism. And this understanding of emptiness you must get there through the understanding of the dependent origination, which Professor Bitbol said is a pratitsamutpad. Pratitsamutpad, this is a Sanskrit word, and there's an equivalent Pali word as well. Pratitsamutpad means dependent origination. So how things come into existence by dependent on other factors. So in the first place, to really understand what this ontological reality is, and I will also go to the extent of saying what is this ultimate reality, emptiness, shunyata, that nothing is really objective there. It's all like a dream coming from the subject, nothing from the object. So to get there, we have to understand the dependent origination. What is meant by dependent origination? Because dependent origination and emptiness, these are the two sides of the same coin. When you say dependent origination, dependent means not independent, no independence, empty of being independent, empty of independence. So empty of independence, empty of independent existence. This is what is referred to as the dependent origination, or what is dependent origination is referred to as the empty of independent existence. So for this, we have to understand the three levels of dependent origination. It's just for information. I don't want to go into detail, and then progressively from number 1 through number 3, we see that even the understanding of dependent origination becomes subtler from number 1 through number 3. As we go down, progressively it becomes subtler. The first one is dependent origination, which all the Buddhist philosophical schools accept as dependent origination. And where is the dependent origination, the whole and the parts, or in other words, dependent origination of the whole's dependence on the parts. And then finally, dependent origination of mere mental destination, how everything comes into existence through pure mental destination, or relationally, nothing really from the object. So of the three, to understand the philosopher and Nagarjuna emptiness, you have to understand the number 3 on the basis of the number 1 and number 2. So this is very interesting. The two truths. I'll jump into two truths, and the comparing the modern physics and the Buddhist philosophy. In Buddhist philosophy, there's a concept known as the two truths, as we will see in the Heart Sutra: two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. And for those of us who are not exposed to these concepts, I will quickly explain them in a little more detail very soon. And then in the modern physics, the earlier with the Newtonian physics, there was a paradigm shift to the quantum physics and relativity theory. So today we see that this is just amazing, they say, similarities between the two traditions. I say in Buddhist philosophy, say conventional truth and ultimate truth. Conventional truth is the truth which we can easily see in a loose sense, which we can easily see more like the macro world. Macro world, which we can easily see. Macro is the big, huge, like the world, the universe, planet Earth, the flower, the food that we eat, your body, the medical systems, and the COVID, the outbreak of COVID, and so forth. This all fall under the macrocosm. And then there's the subtler, the reality, the microcosm. So the subtle reality, subtlest one, which is subtlest, ultimate, they refer to as the ultimate truth, or the ultimate reality, which is the shunyata, emptiness of objective existence. And of course, I would highly, and as I said earlier, all these studies are for what? To trigger your wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is the mind, the analytical mind, which sees the reality, ultimate reality. What's the ultimate reality? So this is all coming from your soteriological purpose of a higher goal. Say, wishing to higher goal doesn't mean that I want to become enlightened somewhere. There's not a connotation. There's a basic instinct within us to wanting to have the maximum happiness and wanting to get away from miseries. And can we attain these? Answer is yes. How? By identifying the root of the problem, get rid of this, and then your goal is accomplished. So what is the root of the problem? Ignorance. How to get rid of this? By the counterpart, the wisdom. What is the wisdom? To know the reality. What's the reality? Then all these concepts come into being. Not because that the Nagarjuna wanted to prove his the intellectual skills. It's not for that purpose. For the purpose of elevating your problem, elevating my problem. Okay, so the concept of true truths are taught, and if you see that, okay, it must have some relevance to getting rid of my fear, my tension, anxiety, and so forth, I would highly recommend you to study this, reflect on this, and see to the effect of this practice in your well-being. Then in physics, I say we see that the relativity theory talking about the macro world, the whole macro world, the universe, how the planets they're connected to each other, and so forth. And then whereas the quantum physics, it talks about the micro world. And then of course the scientists like Professor Michel Bitbol, they're all trying to look for a unified field theory. That's why we see that these theories, they operate very separately, not as in a unified form. So micro and macro. Whereas in Buddhism, these two concepts, the macro and micro, conventional truth and ultimate truth, these two are so beautifully weaved together by the Buddha 2,500 years ago. So if you wanted to know who Professor Anton Zeilinger is, who Professor the Bitbol they named, or identified here with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you see his to the right side we have Professor Anton Zeilinger. In fact, there was like I think 2010 or 11 that the Professor Anton Zeilinger also attended the Mind and Life conference. I was there. Oh no, it was not 2009. It was I think 2008 that he attended the Mind and Life conference. And for your information, there's one book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Universe in the Single Atom. Universe in the Single Atom is about His Holiness's, say His Holiness's presentation of the physics, concepts of physics and concepts of neuroscience, his exposure to the world of physics and neuroscientists and physicists. And so that time the conference was on that book, and but this photograph must be earlier than that. I'm not too sure, or later than that. But it was not during that time. During that time I was there, and Professor Andrew Zeilinger, he gave a beautiful lecture on the quantum physics. Then during the questions session, I asked a few questions, and after the session, he came directly to me. And then he said, "You seem to have some the interesting questions of quantum physics." I said, "Yes, I do have." And he said, "You can ask me now." And it was in His Holiness's residence, and I told him that is for the security reasons that we are not entitled to stay here for longer, so we have to get out. And then I invited him to my room, and I served him tea, and then I asked him several questions on quantum mechanics. So after, I think about after 12 years, after 14 years, after 14 years, in fact, that was last year, 2022, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. Okay, so here we talk about the ontological reality. In other words, what we see is not to be trusted. It is influenced by ignorance. So do not trust your perceptions. So what we see is everything so purely objective, and the reality is purely subjective as opposed to being purely objective. And on quantum physics, the observer effect and the double slit experiment, of course, the Professor Andrew Zeilinger, he is one of the greatest the quantum physicists on the double slit experiment. And so there, how the same object can behave in two ways, which Professor Bitbol already explained. So we see that what is really there objectively, we cannot really say that things 100% like A or B and so forth, they can behave in different forms, because objectively there's nothing really there. It's how your observer or how your subjective mind, the influence, how the subjective minds influence the object. Now we talk about the subjectivity. There's no object. Okay, let's make a difference. Object exists, Object does not exist objectively. There is object, there's no objective reality. This distinction must be made. For example, okay, some of you may feel that, oh, it is so complicated, no way I can understand it. Don't give up. Don't give up. You also have the seed of perfection. You can be as genius as Albert Einstein. So say the flower, looking at the flower, don't say the flower doesn't exist. Flower exists. For example, like say in the dream, you had a dream of having a cheesecake. The dream cheesecake, don't say that the dream cheesecake did not exist. Dream cheesecake exists. The dream cheesecake does not exist as a cheesecake. The dream cheesecake exists as a dream cheesecake. It does not exist as a cheesecake. This distinction must be made. In other words, that the object exists, but the object does not exist objectively. The object exists subjectively. And if you still don't understand it, I'd like to give an example of, say, the movie. Say, when you watch a movie in a movie theater, you're watching a movie on the screen which is like a few feet away from you. Movies on the screen, but it's not from the screen. Movies coming from the projector. It's coming from the projector. So the moment, how do you know that it's coming from the projector? The moment the projector stops, instant the movie on the screen stops. So movies on the screen, not from the screen, is from the projector. So likewise, everything we are seeing, we see them as coming from the object. That is deceptive. That is ignorance. It's all coming from your subjective mind, purely subjective. What do you mean by subjective? How can I understand that things are all subjective? For this, again, we see that there are various levels of subjectivity. So I indicated 4 of them here in line with the very standard books in the Buddhist philosophy. Sorry. Number 1, subjectivity as opposed to substantiality, and particularly those, of course, this is, as long as somebody wants to get away from miseries, you have to know these 4 things. If you don't mind suffering, if you don't mind going through miseries, then it's fine, no need to study these 4. Subjectivity as opposed to substantiality, number 1. This is very gross. Number 2, subjectivity as opposed to externality is still gross. Subjectivity as opposed to 100% true existence. Then finally, and the subjectivity, okay, it should be subjectivity as opposed to objectivity. The number 4. Number 4, we need to add it a little bit. Subjectivity as opposed to objectivity, meaning that in the first three, you may not reject all degrees of objectivity. But in the 4th, you have to reject all degrees of objectivity. So because of subjectivity here refers to subjectivity as opposed to objectivity. Simply because when you say that somebody understands things as subjective, doesn't mean that all degrees of objectivity is rejected. But Professor Michel Bitbol said, even the emptiness is also empty. Emptiness of emptiness. So if you cling to emptiness as real, then you cannot be liberated. You cannot be freed. And this also is ignorance. So the emptiness of all degrees of objectivity, in other words, subjectivity as opposed to all degrees of objectivity. Now, next question, very interesting question that that we need to explore. Particularly Professor Michel Bitbol, you may explore is which level of subjectivity or the observer-based reality, according to quantum mechanics. So where in these 4, where does it fit? Or does it fit in the number 1, 2, 3, 4, or it fits in another category, not necessarily one of these 4? This is something which we really need to explore. Some of the Buddhist scholars who are exposed to Buddhist philosophy, the quantum mechanics, they would say that it falls more closely towards number 2, and some say number 3, and of course some say number 4. So it depends on what is your level of understanding of quantum mechanics and what is your level of understanding of the subjectivity in Buddhist philosophy. Okay, in this connection, the parallel to what we discussed earlier, the subjectivity, now say the 2 sides of the same coin. So when you say that this flower does not exist objectively, it means the flower exists subjectively. So when you say the flower exists subjectively, means from the object is empty, objectively empty. So what is that emptiness? There are 5 levels. Of course, experientially speaking, if you have to really go into this, the study, reflection, and then meditation, you will see that the experientially there can be many layers. But the what you find explained in the very standard books is primarily these 5. Emptiness, just for information. Emptiness of permanent, unitary, independent reality, emptiness of substantial reality, emptiness of externality, emptiness of true reality, and emptiness of objective inherent reality. Okay, so what we studied earlier, that when we speak about the emptiness, it doesn't mean nothingness. And my friend, Professor C.C. Roy, a very senior physicist, Professor C.C. Roy, he was also seeing the same thing. When you talk about the quantum vacuum, it doesn't mean that it's total vacuum. For let's say the 15 billion years ago, what the physicists would classify as the Big Bang, the point of the Big Bang, where the universe came to existence from this singularity. So then, what was there at that point? So the quantum physicists would say that is the quantum vacuum there. There's quantum vacuum. What is this quantum vacuum? Is it really vacuum? My friend, Professor Cicero Roy, a brilliant physicist, who would say that it's not vacuum in the sense of being nothing existing there. There's the incredible potentiality there. Incredible potentiality there. So that is the one which went into the Big Bang and then gave rise to all the existing the universe that we can see. Okay, so what we said earlier of the two sorts, macro and a micro world. Form is empty. What do we see as physical form? The actual form, the object is empty. That is the ultimate reality. Then the emptiness form. What is objectively empty is subjectively real. That is emptiness of form, subjectively real, subjectively as a form. That is conventional reality. Subjective means it's what your mind creates. So conventional, that's conventional truth. And these two things, what you see is from the object being empty, what you see is from the subject as physical form, these two are not contradictory. These two are complementary. Form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness not other than the form. This is extremely important concept. And the beauty of this understanding is that when you see the first line, form is empty, that all your mental disturbance will stop. Because all your mental disturbance, fear, anxiety, stress, depression, anxiety, they all rest on the belief that things are objectively real. The moment you dissolve this by seeing the first line, by understanding the first line, form is empty, and if you sustain that experience, then your mental agitation, fear, the expectations, all these disturbing the mental emotions will subside. Next, knowing that from the object things are all empty, but from the subject things exist. Emptiness form. Objectively things are empty, but subjectively things are physical form. The good, bad, karma, the Buddha, Sangha, quantum physics, and everything is there. Do good things, happiness follows. Do bad things, miseries follow. So all these cause and effect functionality operates on that basis. By understanding this, your experience, your compassion grows, because you see that others exist, I exist, and my things all exist in a relational sense. That my happiness comes into existence in relation to to others, and my miseries arise because of my abusing others. So seeing things in relational terms, then your compassion grows, that my happiness depends on you. I should take care of you. So my happiness grows. Compassion readily grows. So therefore, the first line makes our disturbing emotions subside, your fear, stress, anxiety subsides. And of course, it's not just read this and then your mental emotions subside. No, because all your mental disturbance rests on ignorance, which misconceives the reality. And this ignorance is a cognitive aspect of the mind. So this cognitively is erroneous. We have to fix this cognitively by knowing that form is empty. So it's a very active state of mind to know that nothing really exists objectively. That is wisdom. So with this wisdom, then the ignorance bounds to become weaker. With this, all your disturbing emotions will subside. Then with the knowing the emptiness and still subjectively knowing that things exist, your compassion grows. With accompanying compassion as your happiness simply expands to infinity if your compassion can go to infinity. Okay, this is very important. And I think Professor Bitbol also touched on this part, inexpressible. So the tetralema, which the Aranagajan discussed, ultimate truth is the inexpressible reality, which cannot be expressed. What do you mean by this? Some scholars, even some the Buddhist scholars, they would take it too literally and say that, oh, emptiness cannot be expressed. You cannot learn emptiness. It's just purely experiential reality. You have to just meditate. There's nothing to study. So this is incredibly, greatly being misguided. The person is a clear indication that the person does not know what is the meaning of the inexpressible one here. Okay, objectively inexpressible. Objectively inexpressible, because ultimate truth is related to examine what is there on the objective level. On the objective level, nothing exists. Even the emptiness does not exist. So nothing can be expressed to exist there. It doesn't mean that on the conventional level, things are inexpressible. Things don't exist. No, things can be expressed on the conventional level. On the ultimate level, there's nothing to be expressed as this or that. Tetralema, not this, not yes, no, 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 yes, no, neither yes, no, no, neither no, yes, neither no, no, yes, no, no, no. So the tetralema. So we see that these are the two sides of the same coin. And to know the ultimate, so the question which I began from the beginning of my talk, with which I began, was that while the two things are the two sides of the same coin, emptiness and the dependent origination. Emptiness or the ultimate truth, and dependent origination or the conventional truth. While these are the two sides of the same coin, why one side is known as ultimate truth and the other side is known as conventional truth, not the ultimate truth? Why not? This is an extremely important point to know it very precisely, for example, for your information, let's say that the flower exists. The flower is empty from the object. When you see that flower is empty from the object, when you get it precisely empty from the object, flower being empty from the object, or the empty objective, when you get it, you should be, you get the precise understanding, you should be getting the goosebumps in the body. When you see that, oh, subjectively the flower exists, subjectively the flower exists, the goosebumps will disappear. You're getting it? These are two sides of the same coin, but it's very strange how it has a physiological effect on your body. When you see the emptiness, goosebumps comes in your body, which means that it affects our emotions. It affects the disturbing emotions. Disturbing emotions come down. You can have a very cool, soothing feeling. So you see them objectively is empty. Let's say soothing feeling comes to you. Ticking sensations can come to your body or skin of your body. Subjectively, the flower exists. Instantly, the ticking sensation gradually disappear. While these are two sides of the same coin, it's very funny how one can trigger these physiological changes and the other, let's say, gives a very different feeling. So the first one, while these are two sides of the same coin, the first one is known as ultimate. And it should be understood precisely in the context of the isolate of non-affirming negative. So Professor Bitbol, beginning his talk, he referred to as the Aranagajan philosophy from the negative connotation, negative side, not the positive, not citing something, not positing something, but in the negative sense. So this is what he said. So it is more in line with the ultimate truth, which is to be understood as the isolate of the non-affirming negative. And it's not just non-affirming negative, doesn't mean that, okay, it does not affirm anything. No, it is a very technical term. We have to study this separately. I'm not going to go into detail. The non-affirming is a negative, not only a negative issue, but non-affirming negative. Negative there too. In the second case, you say conventional truth, dependent origination. The isolate of it can be non-affirming negative, it can be affirming negative, it can be positive phenomena. Conventional truth. It can be all three. But for the ultimate truth, it should necessarily be non-affirming negative. And within non-affirming negative, of course, there are millions and trillions of non-affirming negative. It is in the context of having rejected the objective existence. Okay. So how this is known as the ultimate truth, the inexpressible one. What makes us to say that is the inexpressible one? The real meaning is here in the Professional Wisdom Sutra, which says, beyond utterance, thought, and expression is the professional wisdom. Beyond utterance, beyond expression, which are unborn, unceased, and has the nature of space. Say, in the world, we see that things grow, things die, born, cease, but in this ultimate expanse, ultimate reality, say the things, what we see as conventionally as born is unborn, conventionally seen as to be ceasing as unceased, and has the nature of space. Is the object of apprehension of self-realized wisdom. To you, the mother of the Buddhas of the 3 times of obeisance. When you whoever realizes this, we see that your Buddha nature inside, all the ignorance will be cleansed, all the defilements will be cleansed, and the seed of perfection within us will manifest. And this experience of the emptiness will give birth to your full awakening, or make you become a Buddha. Buddha doesn't mean the Buddhism. It is the to make you become perfected in your qualities. Okay, so are in regard to understand this in the form of inexpressibility, inexpressible in these 4 ways. Tetralema, which Professor Bitbol touched. Tetralema, ultimate truth, the inexpressible one, Aranagarjuna's Tetralema, Chatuskoti, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause, does anything, whatsoever, anywhere, ever arise. Okay, this is very interesting, which I briefly touched. Say the towards my extreme left is the towards the extreme left is the white part there. That is the Big Bang. Started from this singularity until today is at the span of 15 billion years. So what is the substrate of all these universe? According to physics, is the singularity, the quantum vacuum. And what is the substrate of the whole universe? From Buddhist philosophy point of view, is the emptiness. So this is amazing. Again, a great parallel there. Emptiness is a substrate of all phenomena, today, past, future, and quantum vacuum is a substrate of the whole universe from the physics point of view. And the difference is that the Big Bang or the singularity or the quantum vacuum is a substrate of the whole universe that is more in the form of a causal factor initial, the trigger, and then everything came into existence from there. Whereas the emptiness is substrate of all phenomena is not only the trigger point, but it's the coexisting with the objects, past, present, future. So this is what I already explained. And then it is very interesting. Nowadays they talk about the quantum entanglement, non-locality, teleportation, a particular teleportation, which Professor Nicholas Gissen, he's expert on this, and he actually manufactures things, say products on the basis of this, the principle, teleportation. This amazing concept, and in Buddhist concept, there's the dependent origination. Of course, it's very similar. So finally, what is the ultimate reality? Emptiness of objectivity of the object is the objectivity of the object. Okay, I'm sure that many of you may see that there's an internal contradiction there. It is not. If you see internal contradiction, you are yet to understand it. And if you say, wow, that's amazing, which means that you're getting somewhere. Okay. So this is where the Nalanda, where all the brilliant thoughts developed, which was once taught by the Buddha Shakyamuni himself. Then Nagarjuna, all these great masters, they came from this university. And then His Holiness now bringing this treasure to the world, not in the form of Buddhism, in the form of what is known as universal ethics, beyond all borders of differences of religion, ethnicity, gender, and so forth, that the universe, the world should be happy. It doesn't matter what religion you are following. It doesn't matter what ethnicity, what gender. You must be happy. Everybody must be happy. So that must be done on the basis of spreading the awareness of the intelligence, the wisdom, and then this wisdom should be implemented to embrace a greater the humanity through compassion. So this is I mentioned Professor Francisco Varela, and then this is extremely something very close to my heart, which the Buddha taught, and Albert Einstein, he said it. He summarized all what I said earlier in very beautiful statement. Human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she experiences himself or herself, their thoughts and feeling as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. So we see me, my, you, and they. This separation is an optical delusion, which is what Einstein is saying. This delusion is a kind of prison for us. Why we are suffering, why all the border tensions happening, is all because of we and you. So this is prison. You cannot, because of which you cannot have good terms. You cannot go along well, restricting us to our personal desires and affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task, what should we do now? Expand your compassion through increasing your knowledge and wisdom. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening a circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This is His Holiness the Dalai Lama launching the Tibet House program, Nalanda Master's Course, which teaches on the ontological reality as taught by the Buddha Shakyamuni, further commented upon by Nagarjuna. And this program was launched by His Holiness in Thiagra Stadium here in Delhi, 2016. And then now we had about like 4,300 students who are connected with this program. Okay, these are some suggested readings. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Venerable Geshela, and thank you to both our speakers. There is so much food for thought. It was so rich. So let's have a lunch break now. I think we also need to feed our brain for this afternoon. We will start again at 2:30 Paris time, which means 6 p.m. Indian time. And this will be mainly a discussion session. So if you can send me your questions by email, they can be in French or English. My email is spc@centre-kalachakra.net. centre-kalachakra.net, and I will write it down in the chat. Enjoy your lunch, and we will see you again in 2 hours and a half. Thank you again for everyone for participating and for 2 speakers.
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you, Professor Michel Bitbol, and thank you, Venerable Genzela, for your hard work, and for everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you too.